Throughout the first half, the game had been a nail-biter with the lead changing at every possession. Lubbock High would score, then Ferguson High would get the ball, and Ferguson's quarterback Danny Keel would lead his team into the end zone to tie the game. The lead had seesawed back and forth throughout the first half, and every time Ferguson had the ball, the Jag staff would pause what they were doing and watch Danny direct Ferguson toward the end zone. Camp Humphrey, Korea was 15 hours ahead of Dallas, Texas, so the game that everyone was watching on Saturday afternoon was taking place on Friday night in Texas during the Texas 6A State Championship game. The game was being shown on a 90-inch wall-mounted monitor being cast from LTC Grant Keel's cell phone to the Apple TV tied into the Jag office AV system. During the second half, Ferguson started to pull ahead, and by the time the 2-minute warning was given in the fourth quarter, Ferguson was comfortably ahead by a score of 48-38. The game was not yet over, and anything could still happen, but it was looking good for Danny's team, and that is exactly how the game finished, with Ferguson ahead by 10. Danny threw for 275 yards and 4 touchdowns with 1 interception off a tipped ball. The Jag staff was working on Saturday to prepare for an upcoming Inspector General visit, and although they were overdue for an IG inspection, LTC Keel was not overly worried about this one. Still, there was always the niggling doubt that someone had overlooked obtaining a signature or getting a timestamp on a document. The Jag office had declared an all boots on the ground Saturday to ensure they were as close to perfect as possible. This inspection was even more important than most because it would be LTC Keel's last visit from the IG due to his upcoming retirement from active duty. Grant had originally been scheduled to retire in 3 months, but it was decided that the IG inspection would be the perfect springboard for a change of command. So shortly after the inspection, he would be flying back to CONUS to begin out processing from active duty. Only his brother knew of his change of plans, and Grant was excited to see the look on his wife's and son's faces when he arrived home. Grant's staff was cheering his son's performance and clapping him on the back as the students' parents and fans rushed the field after the final whistle ended the game. It was pandemonium on the field as everyone began hugging each other and jumping and dancing around the field. When the Jag staff saw the slim, gorgeous brunette throw her arms around Danny to hug him, the cheers and applause in the office were almost deafening. Everyone had seen LTC Keel's spouse's photos on his desk and was envious of his stunning, beautiful wife. Kat's sheer exuberance and joy were written on her face as she hugged her son after his stellar performance. The crowd that had rushed to the field was celebrating by shouting, laughing, and crying usually simultaneously. What she did next, however, caused the cheers and applause to stop and the entire office to become quiet. Kat jumped into the arms of Randy Kane, the Ferguson head coach, and threw her arms around his neck and her legs wrapped around his waist as she gave him a tight hug. She was clad in black jeans that looked like they were painted on, a white tank top, and black boots with 3-inch heels. She had her ankles locked behind Kane's back as they embraced on the sidelines. LTC Keel stared at the screen in disbelief as the staff of the Jag office looked away in embarrassment. His son Danny was tugging on Kat's top as Kane released her, and she relaxed her legs to stand in front of him, her arms still around her neck. Grant stopped the stream, closed Safari, and sat at his desk, stunned at what he had just seen. What his entire staff had seen. The complete disrespect shown to him by his wife and his son's football coach was unacceptable. "Colonel, are you okay?" Captain Lynn Dunaway asked. Grant looked at her and shook his head. "It's not just that she's cheating, it's that she's so blatant about it." He was truly at a loss for words. Captain Dunaway grabbed Grant's hand and pulled him out of his chair. "You need to get some fresh air," she said as she directed him out the back door and into the small parking lot in the rear of the Jag offices. Grant knew he must have looked devastated as he stood in the chilly Korean mid-morning sun with tears streaming down his face. "What the heck?" Captain Dunaway said. "Oh my goodness, Colonel. What she did. That's really messed up." As Grant stood there trying to come to grips with what he had just witnessed, his phone dinged with an incoming text. "Danny, wish you were there. Awesome game. We won 4-8-3-8. I threw 275 4 TDs." Grant looked at his phone debating how he should respond. Captain Dunaway could read his thoughts. However, because she grabbed his wrist before he could return his son's text. "Text back like you normally would. Don't say anything that can come back to haunt you." Grant nodded his head in agreement and responded, "Dad, that's great. Wish I was there too." "Great job." "Danny, how long do you think it's been going on?" Captain Dunaway asked. Does it matter if it's been a day, a month, or a year? I've been in Korea for 9 months now, so it could have been the entire time I've been over here. We purchased the house a year ago, so I don't think it was going on any longer than that since I was at home every weekend. But now I'm wondering how many others have there been. Heck, is Danny even my son? They talked for another 30 minutes until Grant was calm enough to return to the office and address his staff. It was the most humiliating and embarrassing thing he had ever done, and they were embarrassed for him. Shortly after his address to the staff, Grant thanked them for coming in and dismissed them for the day. If they could not pass the IG inspection by now, they never would. The next week was typical of these types of inspections. Similar to an audit in the private sector, an IG inspection is every bit as invasive as a colonoscopy. Everything you have done and every decision you have made is called into question and has to be responded to politely and clearly. The result was that they passed the IG inspection, and it was time to turn over command to LTC Keel's replacement, Lieutenant Colonel Kiana Cardwell. Grant had known Kiana for several years and knew she was a fine officer and an excellent attorney, and the JAG staff would be in good hands. The only person other than Grant not staying in Korea with Colonel Cardwell was Captain Lynn Dunaway. She would be traveling with him to Fort Cavazos in Texas, where he would out-process as active duty and enter the Army Reserve, and she would report to her new duty station with the JAG office at 3 Corps. Grant felt that he owed Captain Dunaway a great debt. In the weeks following the discovery of his wife's cheating, she provided a shoulder to cry on and moral support as he out-processed, leaving the only full-time employment he had ever known. Randy Kane was in a sour mood as he walked toward his truck. He had begun his day with a leisurely swim with his girlfriend. "Girlfriend," he snorted to himself. "Yeah, right. I'm going to miss this," she sighed. The comment annoyed Randy. "We don't have to stop. You can divorce him and marry me, you know." "I'd marry you in an instant if you said yes." Kat stiffened next to Randy. "I've told you that's not happening. I love my husband. When he gets out of the Army, I am going to spend the rest of my life making it up to him for our little adventure. When Grant comes home, you and I will see each other in the hallway, at school, or the cafeteria, smile and say hello. I'll keep teaching science, and you'll keep coaching, and we can be friends. But I love my husband, and nothing is going to break up my marriage." Randy barked out a bitter laugh. "If you love him so much, why am I in your bed?" Kat shook her head. "It's different with you." Randy grimaced at that statement. Kat had met her husband Grant at the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, Australia. Kat had played on the U.S. women's volleyball team, and Grant had been on the U.S. fencing team. Kat was a senior in college, while Grant was a first lieutenant in the Army, participating in their world-class athlete program that provided an opportunity for service members to participate in sports while on active duty. Kat and Grant had met at the Olympic Village and had developed an immediate attraction. The atmosphere at the Olympic Village was a seething cauldron of excitement as young, in shape, attractive athletes mingled with each other. Kat and Grant found themselves in bed together within 2 hours of meeting and had been together ever since. The fact that Kat was from Dallas, Texas, and Grant was raised an hour away in Ferguson, Texas, cemented their relationship. The U.S. women's volleyball team had failed to win in the Olympics, but Grant had won medals twice: a silver medal for individual saber and a bronze medal for team saber. Kat had explained to Randy that her husband preferred the more aggressive fencing style of the saber, since you could score by slashing and cutting, and not just by touching, as with the foil and épée. Randy had just looked at her blankly. When Kat had first told Randy that her husband had been a world-class fencer, Randy had pictured some guy who was really good at using a post-hole digger, and was confused as to why she was bragging about him. After finding out what fencing was, like Zorro, and that it was a real sport, Randy found himself annoyed and jealous that not only was Grant married to an absolute beauty like Kat, but that he was an Olympic medalist as well. While those two had been hanging out at the Olympic Village, Randy had been in middle school preparing for high school football. After playing high school and college football for Arkansas, the 6 feet 6 inches and 265-pound defensive lineman had not been signed by any team. He was signed to the practice squad of the Detroit Lions as a walk-on, but was released after 1 year. He was then signed as a practice squad walk-on by Buffalo, but was released after 3 weeks. Realizing his NFL career was headed nowhere, he signed on to play with the Ottawa Renegades in the Canadian Football League, but was released halfway through their season. Randy then switched to coaching and quickly worked his way up the ranks of high school coaches, culminating with Ferguson's win over Lubbock for the Texas 6A championship. After his win, Several colleges had reached out to Randy about joining their coaching staff, and he felt that he was in a good place, although most of the job offers were contingent upon bringing Danny Keel with him. If he could only convince Kat to divorce Soldier Boy and marry him, life would be perfect. Randy figured he had 3 months to convince Kat to leave her husband and marry him. After that, her husband would be retired and back home. Kat had indicated that there might be a possibility of eventually restarting their affair, but that is all it would ever be. Danny would be starting college in the fall and wouldn't be around like before. Catching his coach and his mom in a compromising position. Wasn't that a near disaster? Kat and Randy thought Danny was out for the day. Randy had walked into Kat's kitchen to get water for both of them. Randy managed to prevent Danny from attacking him, but there was tension brewing between them. Hearing the noise, Kat had entered the kitchen and tried to defuse the situation between Randy and Danny. She reassured Danny that what she had with Randy was only temporary and would not affect her marriage. She pleaded with Danny to keep it a secret from his father, as it would devastate him. Danny reluctantly agreed to keep quiet, and though he had started to accept the affair, he seemed distant recently. Randy knew he was partly to blame for the strain. He had made inappropriate comments about Kat to Danny a few times, and he knew he should apologize for them. However, he hadn't had the chance yet. Things almost spiraled out of control a couple of weeks ago when Danny found Randy in his room, but Randy managed to avoid causing further tension. "Have you tried to change Danny's mind about college?" Kat sighed, feeling annoyed by Randy's persistence. "He's not going to change his mind. He's always wanted to go there, just like his father. It's been his dream." Randy couldn't understand why Danny wanted to go to West Point when he could go to any top D1 school and have a successful football career. He saw it as an opportunity for himself as well, potentially opening doors in his coaching career. However, he knew he had to be careful about how he approached the subject with Danny. As they continued their conversation, Kat leaned over and took Randy's hand in hers. They shared a moment, momentarily forgetting about their differences and the football rally they were supposed to attend. As Randy walked back to his truck after leaving Kat's house, he noticed that his front tire was flat. This couldn't have happened at a worse time, he thought. He was already running late for the pep rally, where the team would be celebrated for their state championship win. Randy was scheduled to give a short speech and introduce each player. While squatting next to his flat tire, Randy felt a sudden blow to his back. It knocked him down and caused intense pain. He turned around to see someone wearing a hoodie, sunglasses, and a mask. The attacker swung an aluminum baseball bat towards Randy's face in slow motion, rendering him unconscious. The assailant then hopped onto a bicycle and quickly rode away. Meanwhile, Kat rushed out of her garage and noticed Randy lying in the street. She immediately called 911 and stayed by his side until help arrived. Detectives Mann and Lucas sat on the sofa in Kat Keel's living room, politely declining her offer of coffee. "We won't take up too much of your time, Mrs. Keel," Detective Mann assured her. "Can you tell us the purpose of Coach Kane's visit this morning?" Kat's face turned red at the question. "He stayed overnight," she said quietly, looking down at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The detectives exchanged glances, and then Mann asked the obvious follow-up question, "Are you in a romantic relationship with Coach Kane?" Kat nodded with tears streaming down her face. "How long have you been involved with Coach Kane?" "About 9 months," Kat answered in a hushed voice. "Does your husband currently live here?" Detective Lucas, the female detective, asked. "My husband is stationed in Korea at Camp Humphrey," Kat sobbed. "He's retiring in 3 months and will be coming home." Kat took a moment to compose herself, taking deep breaths. "Is he aware of your relationship with Coach Kane?" "Oh no, he can never find out about my secret relationship. It would devastate him. We need to keep this from him," Kat pleaded desperately. "Mrs. Keel, we will have to talk to your husband. A man was seriously injured after leaving the house you share with him." "We can't keep this situation hidden from him," Detective Lucas said. Kat burst into loud sobs and left the room to collect herself. When she returned, she had a box of tissues in hand, and the detectives continued their questioning. "Mrs. Keel, are you certain that your husband is in Korea? Could he have returned to the United States?" "No, that's impossible. If Grant was in the US, he would be here. My husband loves me too much to stay away from our home." Kat pulled out her iPhone and showed the detectives. "Look, he is still in Korea." The Find My Phone app showed her husband's phone in Korea. Mann and Lucas exchanged glances, thinking that it only proved the location of his phone. Mrs. Keel, who else lives in the house with you? My son Danny Cat replied. Could he have attacked Coach Kane? Detective Mann asked. No, that's not possible. I heard his car leave about 30 minutes before Randy was attacked, and I know he was at the school pep rally during that time. My son and Randy have a good relationship. Randy was Danny's football coach. Detective Mann knew that Randy Kane was Danny's football coach. The state championship win was a big deal for the city, and Danny's performance was already legendary. Mann had attended the game and had witnessed Kat hugging Randy on the sidelines. Everyone assumed she was the coach's wife or girlfriend. No one knew she was married to someone else. Was your son aware of your relationship with Coach Kane? Lucas asked. Yes, he wasn't happy about it at first, but he came to accept it. I explained to him that it wouldn't affect my marriage to his father, and he understood. Mann and Lucas shared a look, indicating their astonishment at the statement. How naive is this woman? Their expressions seemed to say, Mrs. Keel, we noticed you have a doorbell camera. Can we see the video? Kat looked surprised but then remembered. I completely forgot about that. I have the app on my iPad. Kat grabbed her device from the table and handed it to Detective Mann. Just press play. The detectives watched as Randy Kane left the Keel house and went to the front of his truck, where he noticed a flat tire. Kane's truck obstructed their view, but they could see a tall, thin figure running towards Kane from across the street. The figure wore a black hoodie, wraparound sunglasses, and a mask. The attacker swung a bat several times before fleeing on a bicycle with the bat tucked under their arm. The video didn't provide much information. The attacker's gender or identity couldn't be determined. They would try to enhance the video, but since it was already in high definition, there might not be much to gain. Mann asked Kat for permission to send the recording to his police email, and she agreed. Mrs. Keel, Detective Mann began, emphasizing the word Mrs. Can you think of anyone who would have a reason to violently attack Coach Kane like this? No, Kat sobbed. I can't think of anyone who would do something so terrible. I don't understand why someone would hurt Randy. He doesn't deserve this. Grant Keel sat at the dining table in his brother's house, filling out paperwork that his divorce attorney had requested when the doorbell rang. Betty Lou, his sister-in-law, answered the door and called for Grant, letting him know that there were visitors. He went to the door to find two people, a man and a woman, who showed their detective badges from the Ferguson Police Department. May we come in? The male detective asked. Grant glanced at Betty Lou, who shrugged, so he invited them in and led them to the living room. The detectives noticed the tall, slim woman and were impressed. Betty Lou Keel stood just under 6 feet tall and weighed around 150 pounds. Her black hair was styled in a trendy, asymmetrical bob, longer on one side than the other. A streak of gray ran through her hair, emphasizing her piercing blue eyes. Her nose had a slight bump and was slightly crooked, as if it had been broken. There was a faint 2-inch scar that ran from the corner of her left eye. She was an exceptionally striking woman. Grant Keel was also impressive. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing 180 pounds, Grant had the slim build of a runner. However, the detectives had learned that he was not a runner, but rather a fencer. He had competed in the 2000 Sydney Olympics and was still involved in the sport. Grant's dark hair was starting to show gray at the temples, and his kind blue eyes held a touch of sadness. Detective Lucas found herself somewhat drawn to Grant Keel. Do we address you as Mr. Keel or Lieutenant Colonel Keel? The male detective, Detective Mann, asked. Mr. is fine, or you can call me Grant, or Colonel. I recently got promoted to full colonel, but I don't usually focus on titles. You were getting ready to retire, right? Detective Mann asked. From active duty, yes. I'm in the reserves now with monthly meetings and 2 weeks of summer training. Hopefully I can stick around long enough to earn a star, Grant explained. Detective Lucas nodded. Impressive, she thought. Brenda Lucas had been an MP in the Army, leaving with the rank of E4. The man in front of her was an Olympic medalist, an attorney, a full colonel, and had his sights set on becoming a brigadier general. Kat Keel was a complete fool, she concluded. We'll stick with Mr. Keel for now. I'm sure you know why we're here. I have a good idea, Grant replied. Someone severely beat the man who was involved with my wife, and you suspect me. Did you do it? Detective Lucas, the female detective, asked. No matter how I answer that question, I'll still be considered a suspect. So I'll stay silent, Grant responded. Can you tell us where you were 3 mornings ago at 7:30 a.m.? 7:30? I was working out with my brother. He combined a couple of bedrooms to create a gym, so we work out together from around 7 to 30 until 8 to 30. After that, he showers and starts his remote work. I shower in the guest room afterwards and then begin my own tasks. Was there anyone else present besides your brother? Detective Mann asked. No, just him. My sister-in-law, Betty Lou, leaves for work shortly before we start exercising, so it's just the two of us. When was the last time you were at your house where your wife and son live and where Randy Kane was attacked? About a week ago. I stopped by when no one was home to collect some clothes and paperwork from my files. I didn't disturb anything that belonged to my wife or Randy. Did you know about their affair? Detective Lucas asked. I did. You seem remarkably calm and detached about it. I've accepted her actions and the end of our marriage. It is what it is. A couple of hours ago, Kat still believed you were in the army and stationed in Korea. When we informed her that you had left Korea a month ago and were living with your brother, she refused to believe us. She saw your phone's location still showing Camp Humphrey. She called your office and they confirmed you had left Korea weeks ago. When she realized this, she had a breakdown. She was hysterical, screaming, and we had to call an ambulance to sedate her. Grant shrugged. She's Coach Kane's problem now. He can take care of her, but from what I heard about his condition, he's not in any shape to do that. As for my phone's location, I left it on the charger in my office and forgot it. The officer who replaced me is mailing it to me. The detectives wore skeptical expressions as Detective Mann said, "That's quite convenient, isn't it?" Grant shrugged again and chose to ignore the question. Just then, Grant's brother Leland emerged from his home office and paused upon seeing the detectives speaking with Grant. "They think you did it?" Leland asked. Grant nodded his head. "They haven't accused me yet, but they're hinting at it by coming at me from the side. They were about to ask me how I knew about my wife's affair and why I didn't tell her that I was back in Ferguson. From there, they'll probably ask you about my alibi, and then they'll try to arrest me for first-degree assault before realizing that they have no evidence and no case. Then they'll get frustrated with me and tell me not to leave town before they go bother someone else." "Sounds about right," Leland agreed. The two detectives had been staring at Grant and Leland in disbelief as they calmly discussed what actions the detectives would be taking, their heads swiveling back and forth like someone watching a tennis match as Betty Lou Keel looked on in amusement. "How do you know what we're thinking?" Detective Mann asked, looking at them suspiciously. "I was an Army JAG officer. I've overseen more investigations than you can imagine. My brother was an Army CID agent before retiring and opening his own security company. We know what you're thinking before you think it." Detective Mann had an annoyed look on his face at the thought of his game plan being so obvious. "If you know all the questions, then by all means, please answer them." Grant looked steadily at Mann. "I knew about my wife's affair because I saw her hugging Kane after the state championship game. I'm sure you've seen the video." Mann nodded. He had seen the video of the hug. Everyone assumed it was Randy Kane's girlfriend, but in the wake of the attack, word was starting to leak about the identity of the woman. "I didn't tell her I was back in Ferguson because I don't want to see her. I'm working with a divorce attorney and I didn't want to hear her excuses for her actions or her trying to blame me." "And your son?" Mann asked. "You haven't contacted him either. You saw how he acted with Kane and my wife?" "I did. He didn't seem bothered by it." Grant nodded his head. "Doesn't seem like we have much to talk about, does it?" So Detective Lucas said, "Do you have an alibi? Should we show them the recordings?" Leland Keel asked. Grant nodded. "This seems like a good time. What recordings? What do you have recordings of?" Leland excused himself for a minute and returned with an iPad. He pointed the TV remote control at the 60-inch wall-mounted flat screen. As the TV turned on, he mirrored the iPad to the TV screen and hit play. "I have cameras around the house, including the hallway, the front door, and the backyard. This is the video from this morning." The TV screen displayed 6 different camera feeds. A doorbell camera faced the street, another camera faced outward toward the backyard, and a third camera was located in the garage. The remaining 3 cameras displayed the kitchen, living room, and the hall which contained the bedrooms. This was the feed at 7:22 this morning. They watched as Betty Louisiana exited her bedroom wearing a white blouse, black skirt, and black shoes dressed for her job as CFO of a medical services company. The camera caught her walking down the hall and then lost her as she neared the end of the hallway. The living room camera then picked her up as she walked through that room before being lost again and then picked up by the kitchen camera. That camera lost her as she exited into the garage. The dark garage was suddenly illuminated as the garage door raised and the camera picked her up as she entered her Lexus SUV. Betty Louisiana backed out of the garage and the camera was able to follow her SUV as it backed into the street. At the same time, the doorbell camera caught a side view of her vehicle as she entered the street before the garage door closed. Leland froze the image by pressing pause. You can see by the timestamp that this image was taken at 7:25 this morning. Leland then tapped the screen a few times, advancing the image to 7:28. This is me and Grant. They watched a video of Grant and Leland approaching a room in the hall from different directions. Grant was wearing a red hoodie and red sweatpants, while Leland was wearing the same thing, a red hoodie and red sweatpants. I'm coming from my bedroom and Grant is coming from the guest room, Leland explained. Grant entered the room first, followed by Leland. We can sit here and watch an empty hall for an hour, or I can fast forward an hour your call, Leland said, looking at the two detectives. Fast forward it, Detective Mann said. Leland tapped the screen several times and froze the screen as Grant and Leland emerged from the room at 8:26. They had worked out for 58 minutes. This is the video from yesterday, Leland said. The video was nearly identical to the video of today's activities, with the exception that the times were a couple of minutes off and Betty Lou, instead of wearing a skirt, was wearing a stylish women's black pantsuit with heels. Grant and Leland again came from opposite ends of the hall, meeting at the door to the home gym wearing matching tracksuits, this time gray. They again stayed in the gym for an hour. Leland tapped the iPad screen a couple of times, bringing up another set of screens. This is the same video recordings, but on the morning that the jerk was attacked. They again saw Betty Louisiana exit her bedroom, but instead of being dressed for work, she was wearing workout clothes consisting of a thin black hoodie, black exercise tights, and white sneakers. I took a day off to train because I'm competing in a triathlon in a couple of weeks. Today was a bike day, and I rode the bike path around Ferguson Park 4 times, Betty Louisiana explained. They watched as Betty Louisiana backed her SUV out of the garage and noticed that this time, there were bicycles in the bike carrier attached to the rear deck of her SUV. As they continued to watch the recording, they saw Leland exit his bedroom wearing a black hoodie and black sweatpants, and a couple of seconds later, Grant exited the guest room, also wearing a black hoodie and black sweatpants. The detectives looked at each other in disbelief. Are you kidding me? Asked Detective Lucas. Are you three for real? Do you expect us to believe that it's just a complete coincidence that the three of you are wearing the same type of clothes that Kane's attacker wore on the day he was attacked? Leland and Grant shrugged at the same time. We're going to let the recording speak for itself, Grant replied. Leland said, I'm not going to fast forward the recording, but I am going to play it at double speed so you can watch. Before I do that though, can I get you two a cup of coffee or anything? Even at double speed, we're going to be sitting here for a half hour twiddling our thumbs. After bringing everyone a cup of coffee, Leland again hit play, and the 5 watched the counter count down. After 25 minutes, Leland stopped playing the video at double time and began playing it in real time. The brothers exited the room at 8:31 and walked to their respective rooms, still in their hoodies. That's the day in question. As you can see, neither one of us left that room. I'll make the recordings available to you without a warrant. Can you show us the gym? The detectives did not look convinced about Grant's alibi. Of course, Leland said. The officers followed him into the hallway, glancing over their shoulders at the dark globe concealing the ceiling-mounted camera that captured the hall. They looked around the room containing the gym and then at each other. The home gym was a large room that had been formed by combining 3 bedrooms and eliminating the closets and storage. Half of the room consisted of free weights, benches, an extensive dumbbell set, and kettlebells. It also contained a rowing machine and an elliptical. The other half of the room had been converted into a small dojo. Shelves had been built into one wall and held several trophies. There were also framed photos of Leland and Betty Louisiana fighting opponents in the ring in mixed martial arts competition. In one of the photos, Betty Lou Keel was shown having her arm raised in victory by the referee as her opponent stood by dazed as she was supported by her coach. Betty Louisiana had blood streaming down her face and from her nose. Her left eye was puffy and swollen closed, and her nose appeared to be injured and had shifted slightly to the side. Wow, Detective Lucas said softly and slowly as she looked with admiration at the photograph of Betty Lou. Your wife is incredible. You bet she is, Leland Keel said with obvious pride. And for many more reasons than just this, he said as he waved his hand toward the photos and trophies. She's fiercely loyal to her family and friends and is the best woman I've ever known. She's one of a kind, and I will never get tired of letting her know that. Grant nodded his head sadly. At one time, he had thought the same thing about his wife, but thinking back, Kat was never like Betty Lou. She never had that deep loyalty. What about the windows? Detective Lucas asked. There were ordinary house windows in the room with wooden blinds that were currently open. Are you asking if I could have sneaked out during the middle of a workout and attacked Coach Kane? Grant asked. You could have. Or he could have, Detective Mann said, pointing first at Grant and then at Leland. That's true, Leland said. But we didn't. Can you prove that? Can you prove that you didn't sneak out? Detective Lucas asked in an aggressive tone. Detective Leland said, That's not the right question. Yeah? Well, what's the right question? Detective Lucas asked, her annoyance obvious. The right question is, can you prove that we did sneak out? Grant answered. I'll show you two out now, Leland added. Colonel Cardwell, how can I assist you? Colonel Cardwell, I heard you're in charge of the JAG office at Camp Humphrey. That is correct. Who's calling, please? Colonel, my name is Detective Brenda Lucas with the Ferguson Police Department in Ferguson, Texas. I'm calling about your predecessor, Colonel Grant Keel. Oh, yes. How is Grant? He was fine the last time I saw him. Colonel Cardwell, Colonel Keel told us that he left his cell phone in his office in Korea. Yes, he did. It was on the charger on the credenza in what used to be his office. I didn't know where to send it, so I hung on to it. A few days ago, he called me with an address in which to ship it, which I did. Colonel, what day did he contact you with the address? This past Monday. He also told me to answer any questions about him that anyone who calls may have. It sounds like Grant was anticipating some trouble coming his way, Colonel Cardwell said. Great, Lucas thought. The day of the attack, when he no longer cares if his wife knew he was in town, is when he has his phone shipped back. Detective Lucas thanked Cardwell and then immediately called Grant Keel. I spoke to Colonel Cardwell and she verified what you claimed about your cell phone. She also stated that she shipped it to you. Colonel Cardwell is very efficient. If she said she shipped it out on a certain day, you can bet your pension that she did. Colonel, I want to be the one to open that package. I want to see your cell phone before anyone else. I don't have a warrant, and you are within your rights to say no, but this will go a long way towards establishing your innocence. There was a long pause on the other end of the phone before Keep replied. I don't guess I have a problem with that since I don't have anything to hide. I'll call you when it arrives. If she shipped it out on Monday, it should be here in a day or so. During their canvassing of the neighborhood around Leland Keel's home, the detectives discovered the house across the street from Leland Keel had a doorbell camera that faced the Keel's home. When asked, the homeowner Bobby Lee Gearson stated that yes, his doorbell camera took video and yes, it was stored on the cloud. The detectives felt they were getting their first break in the case and sat down with Gearson to review the recording. Because the houses were catty-cornered from each other, Leland Keel's doorbell camera was angled to capture his own driveway, but recorded only the side of Gearson's house. Gearson's camera, on the other hand, was angled to provide the perfect view of the Keel's home. Bobby Lee Gearson was a fire department captain who had a sideline in designing fire suppression equipment. He had several patents and had licensed his designs to several companies. He had a machine shop attached to the rear of his house with a CNC table, milling equipment, lathes, and cutters. He was divorced and for a hobby practiced martial arts and held a black belt in karate. There was a clear shot of the entirety of the Keel house, including the windows in the home gym, for the day of the attack on Randy Kane. At approximately 7:15, the video showed Bobby Lee Gearson wearing a black hoodie, black sweatpants, and white tennis shoes carrying yard tools from his garage to the front porch, including a rake, hoe, and shovel. As they watched, Gearson leaned his tools against the wall containing the doorbell camera. They watched in disbelief as he leaned the shovel with the blade up and handle down rather than with the shovel blade down and handle up like any normal person would have done. The shovel completely covered the camera and continued to so do for over an hour until Gearson retrieved his tools and started spreading mulch around his house. What in the world did I just see? Man had shouted to Gearson. He blocked the camera, Detective Lucas said, dismayed. I was going to start spreading mulch, so I brought my tools out and leaned them against the wall, but then I started feeling a little queasy, so I went back inside and sat on the sofa and rested for a while. When I started feeling better, I went back outside and finished my mulching. And I guess it was just a coincidence that you were wearing a black hoodie and black sweatpants? Detective Lucas asked, derisively. They must be really good friends for you to put yourself at risk of an aiding and abetting charge, man said, bitterly. Leland and Betty Lou. Well, Betty Louisiana is my sister, and I've known Leland and Grant for like forever so. I'm sorry, what was your question again? As soon as Grant handed her the package, Detective Lucas tore through the box to get to Keel's iPhone before pressing the power button, which did nothing. Dead battery, thought Lucas to herself. Can I borrow this for a couple of days? She asked. Take your time, Grant replied. After charging the phone at the station, Lucas and Man huddled around the phone, waiting for it to boot up. Lucas had an iPhone and had always side-eyed Man's Android in the green text bubbles that came from him. Man sat back and waited for his partner to do her thing. Once the phone powered up, the phone started buzzing as texts and missed calls started loading up. Lucas opened iMessage, Apple's native texting platform, and started going down the list. There was a normal number of texts from Kat to her husband, the usual I love you and miss you type, which was ridiculous knowing how openly she was being unfaithful to her husband. After Kane's attack, Kat's texts had increased, and she had sent a ton over the last few days as her situation was starting to catch up with her. There were a couple from his brother, but the real surprise was the number of texts from Lynn Dunaway. The detectives knew that Captain Dunaway had worked with Grant in Korea and was now assigned to Fort Cavazos. The texts were friendly with no hint of romance. They were mostly checking in with each other, him to make sure she was adapting to a new posting and her making sure he was recovering from finding out about his wife's affair. They also discussed Keel's finding about his wife's affair in the most embarrassing way imaginable, having his entire office staff see his wife jump into the arms of her lover and hug him in front of everyone. Ouch. They read Danny's text to his father immediately after his game and Grant's response. There were a couple more how's it going type texts before they came across a video that Danny had sent to his dad, his uncle Leland, Aunt Betty Lou, and her brother Bobby Lee. The video was self-taken of Danny standing in front of a mirror, and it was date and time stamped a week before the attack. In the video, Danny said, "The pep rally for the banner presentation is next Monday at 9 a.m. I hope you can make it, but I'll understand if each of you is too busy. I'll talk to you soon." Poor kid, the detectives thought. He sounded so down, and his dad's family was cutting him out of their lives for keeping his mother's affair a secret. "Explain this to me like I'm five," Man said. "He hasn't had his phone for over a month, but I can see that he's been responding to texts from his kid and his wife the whole time. What's up with that? Assuming he doesn't have another phone, then he either has an iPad or a Mac synced to his iPhone with his iCloud account. He can respond to text and the other person doesn't know they're not coming from his iPhone. The iPhone location shows Korea, and he's a mile away at his brother's house sending them texts. Wow. His family thinks he's in Korea, meanwhile he's in town making moves and getting his divorce going. Yeah, but so what? Where does that get us? Nowhere, except knowing he's a sneaky guy." Kat Keel awoke to find herself in the hospital. For a moment, she could not remember what had happened to her before it all came back to her in a rush. Grant was in town and had been for weeks, although he had made no effort to see either her or Danny. That thought was like a physical pain that racked her body. I have to see Grant, she thought. I have to explain that my fling with Randy meant nothing, that it did not affect our marriage. Kat started crying, the tears running down the side of her face as she stared up at the ceiling. She was still crying when Danny opened the door to her room. She sat up to receive a hug from her son. "Mom, are you okay?" "Oh, Danny, your father is in town. The police think that he's the one that attacked Randy." "Why do they think it was Dad?" "The police said he's been here 3 weeks. Kat cried out, "That's not good." "What's your plan, Mom?" "I just need to talk to him. I have to explain that things are not as bad as he may think. He has to understand that what I had going on with Randy meant nothing." Detective Man looked seriously upset while Detective Lucas looked at Kat with sympathy. Both detectives had marriages end due to cheating. In Detective Man's case, his wife had cheated on him with an old high school boyfriend and had left the detective a note saying that she was done with being married to a cop. Detective Lucas' marriage had also ended due to betraying her college professor husband with a fellow police officer. They had tried to mend things, but Detective Lucas had not been able to stay faithful and had again betrayed him with the same colleague, resulting in her husband filing for divorce. The irony was, she truly loved her husband and was devastated when he filed for divorce. She blamed no one but herself and sought therapy to find the root cause of her destructive behavior. After 3 years, she was still seeing her therapist every week. She had not been on a date since being served. She empathized with Kat and could only recommend therapy. "Mrs. Keel, do you know how your husband found out about your affair? I imagine someone told him." "No, ma, I am. He says he had the state championship game playing on a big screen in the JAG office. His whole staff was working that day and was watching the game with him. After the game ended, you threw yourself into the arms of Coach Kane, jumped on him, and started hugging him. His whole office witnessed that." Kat looked at the detective with a horrified look as she shook her head. No, that couldn't have happened like that. I would remember doing something like that. That didn't happen." "No, you're lying," Mom Danny said. "It did happen. Everyone saw it. And I was standing right there as Dad watched us, so he knows that I knew about you betraying him." Detective Lucas watched as the realization began to dawn in Kat's eyes that her marriage was likely over. At that moment, there was a knock on Kat's door and a pudgy, middle-aged man carrying a large envelope entered Kat's room and, after nodding hello at Danny and the 2 detectives, asked if she was Catherine Keel. "Sorry to do this here, Ma Am," he said apologetically as he handed Kat an envelope. "You've been served," the stranger said, then turned and left without saying another word. Kat handed the envelope to Danny and, with a haunted, fearful look in her eyes, asked Danny to open the envelope and tell her what it was. Danny opened the sealed envelope by running his index finger under the flap and then extracting the contents, which he held up for Kat to see petition for divorce. Detective Lucas ran into the hall looking for a nurse as Danny frantically pushed the nurse call button while Kat started hyperventilating and making a keening noise as she rocked back and forth in her hospital bed. "Let me show you around," Grant said to Lynn Dunaway as they entered the door into the empty office space. "So, you're buying the whole building?" she asked as she looked around the interior, poking her head into each individual office. "I think I'm going to go for it." The space had been an attorney's office for years until he became too old to practice law and had put the building up for sale. There was room for 3 attorneys, several paralegals, a couple of legal secretaries, and a receptionist. There was both a large and a small conference room, male and female restrooms, and a kitchenette. Lynn was suitably impressed. "Wait until you see the 2nd floor," Grant said with a grin. Grant Keel was very happy to see Lynn Dunaway. But in the months since he had discovered his wife's betrayal, they had spoken by phone at least 3 times a week, and she had provided invaluable support to him. During their time working together in Korea, Grant had never seen her as anything other than Captain Dunaway. He knew that the blonde-haired, green-eyed Lynn Dunaway was objectively very pretty, something that she downplayed while in uniform, but standing in the empty offices of the building he was contemplating purchasing, Grant could see how gorgeous she was. They took the stairs to the 2nd floor, which led to a small foyer that held 2 doors facing each other. Grant unlocked both doors and stood aside for Lynn to enter one, and as she walked into the room, he heard her gasp. The entire 2nd floor of the building was comprised of 2 apartments, a 3,000 square foot apartment and a 1,500 square foot apartment. Both apartments had been completely renovated a few years ago and contained modern bath and kitchen fixtures, as well as 15-foot high plaster ceilings with intricate moldings. But what had caused Lynn's gasp was the view of Lake Ray Ferguson from almost every room in the apartment. Unlike many towns that renovated their downtown squares by adding shops and restaurants, Ferguson never needed to do that. The city's town square was located 1 block from the lake, which shared its name with the town's founder. Shops and restaurants had always occupied storefronts along the city square, and when the Army Corps of Engineers built the lake as part of Roosevelt's WPA, a town center that had always been a thriving and bustling area became even more so with the lake mere feet away. The building that Grant was contemplating purchasing sat on a street corner of the square, with the front of the building facing the town square, one side facing the avenue leading to the lake, and the rear of the building facing the lake and the boardwalk containing even more shops and restaurants. They entered the 2nd, smaller apartment, and Lynn was suitably impressed. It had been upgraded at the same time as the larger apartment and had the same lake views. "Can you afford this?" Lynn asked in a concerned tone. "I have my half of the inheritance from when my folks passed a few years ago. That money was invested in my Fidelity account, and those funds were never mixed with our marital assets. They should be exempt from my divorce settlement. There's more than enough in that account to pay cash for the building. Are you ready to be a landlord?" Grant shrugged at her question. In addition to the law offices and the huge apartments that comprised the entire second floor of the building, also operating on the ground floor of the building was a diner that was open for breakfast and lunch, a Lilly Pulitzer boutique, and an Irish pub that served excellent food in addition to having a house band playing Irish and Celtic folk music Wednesday night through Saturday night. I am so jealous of you, Lynn smiled. You seem to have struck gold at the worst time of your life. Well, actually, I have an ulterior motive for asking you here. How would you like to become partners in a new law firm? Lynn gaped at Grant in surprised shock. Seriously? You want me to resign my commission and move to Ferguson? I don't even know what to say about that. Think about this. You would have the second apartment rent-free. We would be Keel and Dunaway attorneys at law. I'm not expecting an answer now, but think about it, Lynn. Lynn wandered through the second apartment again, looking around, especially at the lake view. At 1,500 square feet, Grant knew the apartment was the same size as the house she was currently renting in Killeen, Texas, outside Fort Cavazos. As he watched Lynn run her hands along the stone countertops in the kitchen while looking at the lake, he observed that she had a thoughtful look on her face. What do you mean their insurance company told you to go away? Randy Kane mumbled to his attorney. He wanted to shout, but it was too painful to do so. Even the act of whispering was excruciating. Randy had most of the wires from his jaw removed 2 days previously after being wired shut for nearly 8 weeks. There were still several pins and screws holding his jaw together, and the popping and clicking coming from his jaw hinge was driving him insane. Any food or liquid that was either too hot or too cold caused his entire head to throb with pain. The casts had been removed from his knees and his elbows, but he still had pins and screws at each joint, and they would stay there for the remainder of his life, such was the trauma from his attack. Randy's insurance was about to reach the policy limit on live-in care, and he was months, possibly years away from being able to live on his own. Even going to the restroom required assistance and would continue to require assistance for several more months. They're denying any liability. You were attacked on a public street and not on the Keel's property. No one has been charged in the attack, and the investigation is still ongoing. If one of the members of the household is convicted in the attack on you, then we can go after them, since there is a $1 million umbrella policy as part of the Keel's homeowner's policy. But that's only if someone from their home is convicted. Todd Blair had gone to high school with Randy Kane, and at that time thought him a real jerk. Time had not changed his opinion of Kane. Knowing that he was in this situation because he was involved with someone's wife reinforced Todd's negative view of Kane. What's going on with the police? Investigation? Every time I call Mann or Lucas, they ignore me. That is when they even bother to return my calls, Randy mumbled bitterly. Todd rubbed his temples as he stared at the speakerphone. He was hoping the detectives would speak to Randy, but they appeared to be in no hurry to give him the news. Todd sighed. The investigation is over. I met with detectives Mann and Lucas yesterday, and Randy said eagerly. And you're not going to like this, Todd said. Detectives Mann and Lucas had completed their investigation, and the meeting with the district attorney had not gone well. What you're telling me is that you're pretty sure Grant Keel carried out the assault. No, said Mann. We know he did it. But you can't prove it? Asked the DA. Mann and Lucas had looked at each other, unhappy with the direction the conversation was taking. It also sounds like it could also possibly be the brother, the DA observed. The detectives reluctantly agreed. Heck, it sounds like it could also be the brother's wife. The DA checked the file for the name and said, Betty Lou. Or maybe even Betty Louisiana's brother, Bobby Lee Gearson. The two detectives nodded glumly. You two know that the purpose of a criminal investigation is to narrow down the list of suspects, not keep adding to it. Why, I'll do any more investigating and you'll put half of Ferguson on your suspect list. The detectives looked morosely at each other and then back at the DA, who shook his head. I'm sorry, detectives, if that's the best you've got, then it's a no. There's no way I'm bringing charges or going to trial with this dog of a case. A first-year law student could get the charges dismissed. Come back when you have something. Mann and Dunn returned to the Ferguson police station and dejectedly reported to the assistant police chief the results of their meeting with the county district attorney. The APC prioritized for them a new case, filing the Randy Kane assault under open and unsolved. Kat didn't fight the divorce. Her attorney advised her that it would be a waste of time. Her affair was so public and disrespectful to her husband that no judge would insist on counseling. Her best option was to agree to the divorce, and over time, Work on mending her relationship with her husband and repair the damage she had done to her son by making him keep her affair away from his father. Grant had been fair in the divorce. Kat got to keep the house and Grant finished paying off the mortgage. Additionally, Kat would be eligible for a portion of his military pension. The formula that would be used was based on the fact that we're married for 20 of the 25 years of Grant's military career, so she would receive less than half. Grant wanted a couple of pieces of furniture from the house, but little else other than some tools and his clothes. Finally, the time came for a conversation. Grant had not been looking forward to this, but he knew that Kat needed it, and he was willing to grant this last gesture. They met in a conference room at his attorney's office. "Grant, I know what you think of me, and however harshly those feelings are, or however much I disgust you, please know this. I am more disgusted and appalled by my behavior than you will ever know. I have no excuse and can say nothing to mitigate my actions. I hope one day you can forgive me and you will be able to be in the same room with me." Grant looked at his now ex-wife. "Kat, I loved you. Heck, I still love you, despite all that you've done. But I am learning to love you a little less every day. I hear what you are saying about how you feel, but that's just a word salad as far as I'm concerned. I don't wish you harm, but I don't wish you well. I want you out of my life to the extent possible. I know we'll have to interact because we share a son and there will be events in which we will both be involved, but given a choice, I would prefer to never see or speak to you again for the rest of my life." Kat broke down crying at Grant's words. She understood his anger and his pain, but she had one final request of her soon-to-be ex-husband. "Grant, please do one final thing for me now that our marriage is over. Please see Danny. He misses his father. It pains me that the two of you have not seen each other since you've been back. Please see your son and talk to him." Grant had nodded his head as he turned and left his attorney's conference room. "There has to be something I can do," Randy whined plaintively. "I can't coach and I can't teach. I can barely take care of myself. I'm almost broke and my insurance is running out. What am I supposed to do?" O.J. Simpson Todd said. "What the heck are you talking about?" Randy said. "You remember when the jury acquitted O.J. of killing his wife and that other guy? Goldman?" "Yeah, so? Goldman's family sued O.J. for damages. Civil suits don't have the same burden of proof as criminal courts and the family won millions. O.J. didn't have the money, but they took what he did have, and in the court of public opinion, everyone now knows that O.J. is guilty." "You're saying I should sue Grant Keel?" "I don't know. It's an option for you, I guess. Up to you. You'd take the case?" Todd Blair quickly shook his head no. He wanted nothing further to do with this jerk. "I'm booked up, but I can refer you to someone. This is probably more in line for his skill set anyway." It was a subdued gathering in Grant's apartment after his divorce. His brother Leland, Leland's wife Betty Lou, Betty Louisiana's brother Bobby Lee Gearson, Lynn Dunaway, and Grant were chatting in the living room of Grant's apartment above his law office when the doorbell rang at the downstairs entry. Grant opened the camera app, noted the identity of his visitor, buzzed open the door, and walked to the door of his apartment to await his visitor, who knocked a minute later. Grant took in the sight of his son standing in the entry and pulled him in for a hug, before pushing him back at arm's length while grasping his son's shoulders. "You look good," son, Grant said. "You too," Dad Danny replied. Danny followed his father into the living room and smiled a greeting to his aunt and his uncle by marriage. He had not met Lynn, but he knew who she was. They all looked at Danny as silence. "A baseball bat? Really? I thought the plan was to rough him up a little," Betty Louisiana said. Danny looked at Lynn, who said, "I've known everything since Korea. As soon as you sent your dad the text telling about the affair, I knew about it 10 minutes later. As soon as he knew that his mother was cheating on his father, Danny had sent his dad a text. He had kept his father in the loop the whole time. They deleted their texts for deniability while at the same time, hoping that they would never need that deniability. The plan was to simply leave active duty and divorce Kat, but things had changed. Kane was beginning to pressure Danny about not going to West Point, and the level of disrespect Kane was showing Grant's family skyrocketed. After Kane had stood in front of Danny in his own house after coming from Kat's bed and then assaulting Danny in his own home, Danny wanted revenge. Some people will quote the ancient proverb that if you begin a journey of revenge, first dig 2 graves. Grant thought that was absolute nonsense. He much preferred Francis Bacon's comment that revenge is a kind of wild justice. even though he knew that Bacon was not advocating for vengeance but rather the opposite. Still, Grant felt that there was a cathartic, healing power in visiting great violence upon those who had greatly wronged you. He would not deny his son his own wild justice. To that end, Grant had agreed to Danny's plan to end his mother's affair, while also not destroying his relationship with his mother. It had long been decided that Danny would stay away from his dad and family until the divorce was finalized and the police investigation was over. Danny shrugged apologetically. It just all came boiling out. Every smirk he gave me. Every comment about Mom being a great person. Every comment about being my stepfather. I admit, I wanted to hurt him at that moment. It was all I could do to stop pounding on him. I knew that I couldn't take him one-on-one. That leg sweep he threw at me showed me how fast and how strong he was. I couldn't take him down that way, but Danny trailed off as he thought about bringing the bat down on Coach Kane's back. He was not happy attacking from behind, but the much bigger man would have hurt him otherwise. When I collected my bicycle, you were cool as a cucumber. When I read about how badly you messed up the jerk, I thought, oh yeah, he's a keel all right. Operates just like his dad and uncle. Betty Louisiana looked at Lynn, who was sipping a glass of lemonade and listening to the conversation with amusement. Are you sure you want to associate with this family? Lynn had smiled and taken a sip of her lemonade. Later, after his visitors were gone, Grant sat on the sofa next to Lynn, their shoulders and thighs touching. Well, partner, she began, I'm glad that this is over. Now maybe we can concentrate on growing our practice and other things. She smiled at Grant, who smiled back. As long as Grant was married, he refused to act on the feelings he had for Lynn. Now that the divorce was final, he could get out of limbo and allow his feelings to grow for the person who had stood by him for so long. The following morning, Grant was in his office reviewing a will that a client was having him draft when the exterior door buzzed, indicating someone had entered the law offices of Keel and Dunaway. Lynn came out of her office to join Grant in the reception area. They did not yet have a receptionist. Can we help you? Lynn asked of the portly, middle-aged man. I'm looking for Grant Keel, the man replied. That's me, Grant said, stepping forward with his hand out to shake. Instead, the man handed Grant an envelope. You've been served, the man said with an apologetic shrug before turning and exiting the office. Roland Cruz contemplated the broken man sitting across from him. He was very aware of the attack on the former head coach of the Ferguson Wildcats. In the aftermath of the attack, Kane had been fired from the Ferguson School District due to his inappropriate relationship with a married school teacher whose employment had also been terminated. Cruz knew that he had a reputation as someone who takes on questionable cases. When Raleigh walked into a courtroom with a client, most judges automatically assumed his client was guilty before the trial even began. So you're dating this guy's wife, her son knows all about it and is okay with it? Really? Randy nodded his head. I know it sounds crazy, but Danny Keel and I had a really good relationship. You say had like it's in the past. You two don't have a good relationship now? He hasn't called or visited me since I was attacked, Randy said bitterly. Nothing. And I was like a father to that boy. Raleigh Cruz shook his head at the whole ridiculousness of the case that Randy Kane had brought to him a few weeks ago. It had been nearly 6 months since the attack, and Randy was desperate for money, and suing Grant Keel was his only option. The police investigation had gone nowhere. They were sure that Grant Keel was the person who attacked Randy Kane, but they could not prove it, and Keel's family had made the situation confusing. There wasn't even any circumstantial evidence tying Grant Keel to the assault, let alone solid evidence. The weapon used had never been found, and the way the Keel family acted suspiciously on the day in question was not proof of anything other than they were acting strangely. So Raleigh was left trying to figure out what was really happening. He had requested and received copies of every bit of evidence the police had, and was in the process of reviewing it all and trying to determine the truth. By all accounts, Catherine "Cat" Keel had been a loyal, devoted wife for 20 years. Her family had moved to different places due to military postings, but during all that time, there was no hint of any problems. When her husband was sent to Korea, something changed. Since Korea was considered a difficult assignment, his family could only go with him if he agreed to stay for 2 years. Otherwise, it was a 12-month tour. This meant that Danny would not be able to play football his senior year. After much discussion, it was decided that the Keels would purchase a home in Grant's hometown of Ferguson, and Danny would attend Ferguson High School while Kat tried to find a job as a science teacher, something she had done at previous postings. Shortly after her husband left for Korea, Kat had developed strong feelings for the charming, twice divorced, and 10 years younger football coach. She had been in a relationship with Kane for months, and her son knew about it. The whole school suspected something was going on. Grant Keel found out about the affair and moved to Ferguson after leaving active duty. He had not told his wife or son about the move and stayed with his brother instead. Grant, his brother, and his sister-in-law purposely avoided Kat and Danny during this time. As Raleigh reviewed all the evidence and watched the recordings, an idea formed in his mind. Leland, Betty Lou, Bobby Lee, Lynn, and Grant were once again meeting, this time joined by Danny. All but Lynn had been served notice that they were being sued as part of a plot to assault Randall Kane, Jr. This alleged assault had left him unable to work and took away Mr. Kane's source of income. The plaintiff was seeking $10 million in damages. How bad is this going to get? Bobby Lee Gearson asked. Grant shrugged at the question. The jury in a civil suit doesn't require as much proof as the jury in a criminal court. In a criminal court, the prosecutor has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil suit, the plaintiff only has to provide some evidence that it might have happened. Listen, I won't let you all face the consequences alone. This is my problem, mine and Danny's. I'll meet with Kane and his lawyer and agree to a resolution if they drop the suit against you three. That's unfair, Betty Louisiana snapped. We're family, we stand together. Lynn is going to defend us and she is going to do a great job. Agreed. Leland and Bobby Lee immediately agreed. Bobby Lee wasn't related by blood, but he had known Grant and Leland since grade school. When his best friend, Leland, married his sister, Betty Lou, it had been one of the happiest days of his life. Then that's settled? Leland asked. We tell this Roland Cruz guy to leave us alone? Everyone agreed. During opening statements, Raleigh Cruz explained to the jury his strategy. He was going to prove to them that a plot existed among Grant Keel's friends and family to attack, and then subsequently cover up the assault on Randy Kane. He further explained that although the police were unable to prove for certain who attacked Randy, they were all part of the plot and should all be held responsible. Lynn's statement was simple. The police did not have enough evidence to charge anyone, and Randy Kane's lawsuit was a desperate attempt to extort money from the family of a man he had wronged by having an affair with the man's wife. Cruz's first witnesses were predictable. He called to the stand the medical professionals who had treated Kane to explain the extent of his injuries. There was very little room for cross-examination because Kane's injuries were what they were. They were not self-inflicted, although debating that was briefly considered. It was ultimately decided that convincing the jury that Kane had repeatedly struck himself in the face and groin with a baseball bat would be difficult, but instead had been inflicted by someone with a personal grudge. Cruz then called the law enforcement officers that had responded to Kat's emergency call. The officers confirmed that the crime scene was as described by Cruz. Cruz then called Catherine Keel to the stand. Kat confirmed that she had been in a romantic relationship with Randy Kane and that it had been going on for several months. She stated that Kane had told her he loved her and wanted her to leave her husband for him. She denied being in love with Kane, although she admitted she had developed strong feelings for him. Kat said she knew that Kane had made inappropriate comments to Danny, but she believed it was locker room talk and that Danny was not bothered by it. Finally, she admitted that Kane had a small altercation with her son and had to exert some force to calm him down. She also said she believed her husband was in Korea at the time of Randy's attack and was unaware of her affair. When she learned that Grant had been in Ferguson for weeks and knew about the affair, she had a mental health crisis that required hospitalization and being placed on suicide watch. Lynn's cross-examination dismantled Kat's testimony. Mrs. Keel, why did you choose to have a relationship with the plaintiff, Randy Kane? Objection. Cruz shouted. The term relationship is prejudicial to my client, Your Honor. Perhaps so, Mr. Cruz, but it is an accurate term and I'll allow it, the judge stated. Mrs. Keel, please answer the question, Lynn said. I didn't have a good reason. My husband is a wonderful man. He's smart, handsome, and athletic, and he was deeply in love with me. But I was vulnerable, vain, and insecure. At the time, I was turning 42 years old. My son was going to leave home soon and go to college. My husband was stationed thousands of miles away, and I felt lonely. Coach Kane is attractive and knows how to charm. All the female students and teachers had a crush on him, and I was flattered when this younger guy started showing interest in me. He knew how to say the right things to me, and I fell for it completely. Kat had to pause to compose herself. Lynn fetched her a box of tissues and waited for Kat to give a nod that she was ready. I've learned a lot over the past few months. I now know how to protect myself against people like Randy Kane, Kat said. Objection, Cruz shouted as he stood up. Mr. Kane is not the one on trial here, and the witness's characterization of him as a negative figure is false and inflammatory. I request that it be stricken from the record and the witness be advised not to make statements like that. The judge looked at Kane for a moment before addressing Cruz's objection. Whether the term is false can be argued on another day. I do agree, however, that the term is inflammatory. But, Counselor, I feel a bit foolish for having to point this out, but Mrs. Keel is your witness. You called her to the stand, not the defendants. The objection is sustained. Blushing with embarrassment, Cruz angrily sat back down next to Kane. Mrs. Keel, Lynn began, is it possible, in your opinion, that any of the defendants attacked Coach Randy Kane? Kat glanced at the table where her husband's son and the other 3 defendants were seated. She shook her head firmly. No, I refuse to believe that they were so angry that they would act completely out of character. If they were capable of attacking Randy like that, it means they're lost to me forever. Tears began to roll down Kat's cheeks. I can't accept that. Kat covered her face as she sobbed on the stand. The next witness was the lead detective tasked with investigating the assault on Randy Kane. Please state your name, employer, and job title for the jury. Roland Cruz said to the detective after he was sworn in. My name is Kenneth Mann, and I'm a detective with the Ferguson City Police Department. Thank you, detective. How long have you been working for the Ferguson Police Department? 22 years. 15 as a patrolman, and the last 7 as a detective. Detective, can you tell the jury about the events of the morning in question? My partner, Detective Brenda Lucas, and I were in the middle of investigating a report of a stolen car when our dispatcher directed us to an address where an alleged assault had occurred. We arrived at 1212 Conway Lane and found a male who had been badly beaten. Catherine Keel, the owner of the house, was attending to him. The EMTs were on their way. Detective Mann, in your professional opinion, what could have caused the injuries you observed on Mr. Kane? A weapon. Something like a baseball bat or maybe a stick. Roland then had Mann recount his investigation, starting with his interview with Kat Keel. So Mrs. Keel had no idea her husband was in Ferguson. No, she thought her husband was still in Korea. It wasn't until a couple of days later when I tried to contact him in Korea that I learned he was back home in Ferguson. Did you find it strange that he was in Ferguson but hadn't contacted his wife and son? You could say that Detective Mann dryly replied. It raised some red flags. During your interview with Mr. Keel at his brother's house, did he mention his wife's affair? He said he was aware of it. How did he find out about the affair? Cruz asked. He mentioned that while watching the high school championship game, he saw his wife hug Coach Kane. He said that from the video he was watching, he could tell his son knew about the affair as well. Detective Mann, did Mr. Keel explicitly state that this was when he found out about the affair? Mann thought for a moment before replying. No, he didn't explicitly say that now that you mention it. He avoided answering the question directly, and I didn't catch him at it. Mann looked embarrassed by his own omission. Raleigh then presented the recordings from Leland and Betty Lou Keel's home security system as evidence, and Mann explained their significance. Detective Mann, what are your thoughts on these recordings as a police professional? On the surface, they seem normal enough. One way to look at them is as everyday activities with minor variations. The other way to look at them is that the Keels are quite clever. They're trying to create doubt and confuse any investigation into their activities. Did you question them about this? Cruz asked. I did, several times. And every time, they gave the same response. The video speaks for itself. The next video introduced was the recording from Bobby Lee Gearson's doorbell camera. What do you make of this video, detective? Cruz asked. It serves the same purpose as the Keel's video. On the surface, everything seems fine and honest, but there is a clear attempt to deflect attention, especially with Mr. Gearson covering up the only camera with a view of the Keel's house. Do you find that suspicious? Mann chuckled sarcastically. I find everything those 4 now 5 with the son have done to be suspicious. And what did Mr. Gearson say when you questioned him about this? He responded just like the Keels. The video speaks for itself. The final video introduced was the one that Danny had sent to his relatives about the pep rally. What was your impression of this video, detective? I felt sorry for the kid. He reached out to his relatives, but they all cut him off because he knew about his mother's affair with his coach and didn't share it with anyone. When did Danny send that video to his family? Cruz asked. 1 week before the attack on Coach Kane. Did you notice what Danny was wearing in the video? He was wearing a black hoodie and dark jeans. It seems like everyone in the family owns a black hoodie, man observed, which made the jury chuckle. As part of your investigation, did you confirm that Danny actually attended the pep rally on the day of the attack? Yes, I verified that fact. How did you confirm it? Cruz inquired. I asked the high school principal, and he confirmed that Danny was there the whole time. Since Coach Kane was absent, the principal had to step in and take over his role. You could have also confirmed Danny's attendance by checking the website of the local Ferguson newspaper. Rowland added, handing man a copy of the newspaper. There, on the front page, was a photograph of the football team at the pep rally, with Danny standing next to the high school principal. Detective Mann, can you describe what Danny is wearing in that photo? Mann's eyes went wide, and his jaw dropped as he stared at the newspaper. He's wearing a black hoodie and dark jeans, just like everyone else in his family that day. Did you investigate Danny's activities leading up to the pep rally? Detective Mann shook his head. No, we knew he was at school, and we had no reason to believe he had left the campus. The detective paused, glaring at the defendant's table. That's on me. I knew his dad was cunning, and I should have realized that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Lynn objected, and the judge ruled Mann's statement as stricken from the record, but the damage had already been done. Detective Mann, returning to the video Danny sent to his relatives, could it have been confirmation of a pre-planned scheme? A plan in which Danny instructed his family on what to wear that day and ensured they had alibis? Could it be that we've been looking at the wrong person all along? Objection. Lynn shouted, but it was too late. The jury's attention had already turned to Danny. How did he figure it out? Danny asked. They were gathered in Kiel and Dunaway law offices later that evening, going over the day's testimony while the remnants of several pizzas grew cold. It seems Roland Cruz is sharper than people give him credit for, Lynn answered. He realized that all the actions of your dad, uncle, Betty Lou, and Bobby Lee were distractions designed to give you the opportunity to target Kane. Maybe you all were too clever for your own good. Either Cruz hasn't figured out that Betty Louisiana dropped a bicycle near the school, or he can't prove it, so he's not pursuing it. What's our next move? Betty Louisiana asked. I'll make a settlement offer to Kane, Grant suggested. No, everyone exclaimed in unison. We stick together, Betty Louisiana affirmed, and Danny, Leland, and Bobby Lee nodded in agreement. How badly did today's testimony hurt us? Danny asked Lynn. It made an impact, no doubt about it. But Kat unintentionally helped us more than she did Kane. The comment about him being a predator was gold. Lynn glanced at Grant with a hint of suspicion. What did you think of her testimony? Grant shrugged. I'm glad she was able to bring up the predator comment, but overall, her testimony didn't affect me personally. She'll always be Danny's mother, but that's the extent of it. He grabbed Lynn's hand and pecked it, smiling at his law partner. Tomorrow, it will be Kane's turn to testify, and I believe after that, Cruz will rest the plaintiff's case. Our witnesses won't take long, so the trial should wrap up by tomorrow afternoon. For better or worse, we should have a verdict the following day. The group fell into a subdued silence as they contemplated the end of the trial and the possible outcome. As expected, the following morning began with Randy Kane, the former coach of the Ferguson Wildcats football team, taking the stand. After being sworn in, Roland Cruz began his questioning. Coach Kane, he started, causing a reaction at the defendant's table. Objection. Lynn objected. Mr. Kane is no longer employed as a coach. I would remind Mr. Cruz that Mr. Kane was fired due to his affair with a married teacher. The judge took a moment to think before shaking his head. I'm overruling your objection, counselor. Mr. Kane has previously served as a coach. I used to coach my son's little league team, and even now, his former teammates still refer to me as Coach Bowman. Therefore, I will permit the plaintiff to use the title of coach. Cruz turned to Lynn, momentarily taken aback by her amused expression. To continue. Coach Kane, can you describe your relationship with Catherine Kiel? Kane managed a sad expression. I loved her. I didn't intend to fall in love with a married woman, but sometimes your heart takes you places you shouldn't go. I know it was wrong, and I am deeply sorry for my part in the affair. I want to apologize to her husband as well. Randy momentarily glanced at Grant with what he believed was a sincere apologetic look. I made a mistake, but that doesn't justify what they did to me. Kane pointed angrily at the defense table, raising his voice. Cruz gestured for Kane to calm down. Did Mrs. Keel have the same feelings for you? Yes, or at least I thought she did. She would say she loved me, but whenever I suggested that she divorce her husband to be with me, she would shut me down. She didn't allow me to say anything negative about her husband, which I found absurd. We would have 2 hours of fun together, completely spent, and the moment I mentioned it being better than her time with her husband, she would become upset with me. Kane shook his head and sadly looked at Kat, who was seated in the back of the courtroom. The only thing I did wrong was fall in love with the wrong person and try to do the right thing. Kane wore a sorrowful and defeated expression as he turned to face the jury. Cruz glanced at the jury and was not convinced that they were sympathetic to his client, but from experience he knew juries were notoriously difficult to gauge. How was your relationship with her son, Danny? Cruz asked. Great, said Kane. It was his first year at Ferguson High, and it was my first year as head coach. Danny came in with a lot of raw talent, and I think I was able to harness that potential and turn him into one of the best high school quarterbacks in the state. Maybe the entire country. We had a very close player-coach relationship, and I thought he considered me as almost a stepfather. I see now that I was wrong about that. If Danny's the one that hurt me, I guess I never really knew him. At that point, Cruz rested his case and Lynn Dunaway began her questioning. Mr. Kane, what is your definition of a true leader? Cruz immediately objected, asking the relevance of the question. At the judge's question, Lynn explained that it would soon become clear. The judge allowed the question but told Lynn she was on a short leash. My definition of a true leader is someone who his teammates can always depend on to have their back and be there for them. Someone who always gives their best. Someone who lives their life in a way so that they can hold their head up high and be proud that they did their best for themselves and their team. Mr. Kane, this is so important to you that you even have this sign over the locker room exit, correct? Lynn handed a photo to Kane in which a sign read, "Play with integrity today." Yes, Kane said, beginning to have an uncomfortable feeling about where the questioning was going. When the players leave the locker room, they touch the sign on their way out, don't they? They do. Mr. Kane, would you say that any part of that very eloquent description of what it means to be a true leader was in any way represented in your relationship with Danny Keel? Kane glared at Lynn as he sat in silence after she asked her question. Judge, could you please direct the witness to answer my question? Before the judge could speak, Randy barked out, "No." Is that what you wanted to hear? No, my actions were not in line with how a true leader should act. But I made the mistake of falling in love with a person who I thought loved me back. A married person, Lynn emphasized. Yes, a married person, Kane said, his bitterness obvious. Mr. Kane, tell us about the time you had a disagreement with Danny Keel. The change in direction momentarily confused Kane. What? I never had a serious disagreement with Danny. You mean the time that I thought he was mad and was going to confront me? That was just a minor argument. There was no assault. Thank you for clarifying that, Mr. Kane. You have made much of your mentorship of Danny and turning him into the quarterback he is now. Did you receive coaching offers from colleges and universities after Ferguson won the state title? Yes, I received several offers, Kane replied. Because of the incident, they've all been rescinded. Really, Mr. Kane? Because of the incident? Lynn walked to the defendant's table and grabbed some papers, bringing them to the witness stand and handing them to Kane. Are these copies of your offer letters? She asked. After looking over the letters for a minute, Kane agreed that they were his offer letters from several colleges. Mr. Kane, each one of these offer letters seems to be contingent upon you being able to recruit Danny Keel. Is that accurate? Kane's face burned with embarrassment. How did this person get copies of the letters? He wondered. Yes, that's accurate, he snapped. Danny was intent on going to West Point, just like his father. He had, in fact, been recommended by his congressman and had been approved. You kept insisting that Kat Keel try to discourage him from attending there and instead go with you to a college where you would be hired. Isn't that correct? Yes, but I knew that it was better for him, too. If he played for a Division I school, that would get him into the NFL and let him have a successful career. He would be set for life. And if you followed him into the NFL as a coach, you'd have a successful career as well, wouldn't you? It seems that your reputation as a coach was only as strong as your relationship with Danny Keel, wasn't it? Kane again glared at Lynn as she turned to the judge and said, "I have no more questions for this witness, Your Honor." Upon returning from lunch, it was time for Lynn to call her first witness, Danny Keel. After being sworn in, Danny took his seat on the witness stand. "Danny, when did you first become aware of your mother's connection with Randy Kane?" "I don't remember the exact date, but it was pretty soon after it began. Like within a day or two." "And what did you do after finding out?" "I called my dad to let him know what was going on." There was a loud gasp from the spectator section as Kat realized that her son's loyalty to his father outweighed his loyalty to his cheating mother. "What was your dad's reaction?" "He didn't believe me at first. After that, he was in shock for a bit. Then he was upset before telling me to follow Mr. Kane's and Mom's lead for a while. So that's what I did. When my mother realized that I knew, she told me to keep quiet about it and it would blow over after a while, but if I told Dad, it would disrupt our family." While asking questions, Lynn had sidled over so that she was next to the jurors and could see that they were sympathetic to Danny. "Danny, your mother mentioned a minor altercation which in his testimony Mr. Kane referred to as an argument. Can you describe for the jury that incident?" "I was sitting at the breakfast nook in the kitchen. My mother and Mr. Kane either didn't know or didn't care that I was home. Mr. Kane came out of my mother's bedroom angry. It was obvious that they had a disagreement. Mr. Kane was making rude comments about how incompatible he was with my mother. I stood up and took a step towards him, and he pushed me, causing me to fall. I hit the kitchen floor so hard it was painful, and when my head hit the stone floor, I almost lost consciousness. He then made a couple of comments about their relationship before going back into the bedroom." Once again, there were gasps and sobs from the spectator section as Kat realized her role in the disrespectful situation caused by Randy Kane. Raleigh Cruz could only look on in horror as any sympathy for Randy Kane among the members of the jury had long since fled. "Danny, much has been made of a video you made asking your family members to come to your pep rally. The plaintiffs have indicated that you, a high school student, were the ringleader of some sort of plan to confront Mr. Kane and then cover it up. I guess they think you came up with this plan during homeroom or maybe in the school cafeteria." Lynn waited for the laughter to die down and she again noticed several of the jury members looking fondly at Danny. "Can you tell us about this video?" Lynn asked as the video played on the courtroom monitor. Danny looked earnestly at the jury. "I know you've heard this a lot during this trial, but the video really does speak for itself." With that, Lynn had no more questions for Danny and turned the questioning over to Raleigh Cruz, who only had one question for Danny. "Danny, do you know who attacked Randy Kane in the street outside your house?" Danny glanced at his father before looking at Raleigh Cruz and then replied, "Yes, I do." Raleigh was momentarily speechless at the admission before gathering his wits and asking, "Who attacked Randy Kane?" "I did. I confronted him for his earlier actions and for having a connection with my mother." A gasp was again heard from the spectators as Kat cried out, "No, Danny." The judge banged his gavel to admonish and quiet the spectators in the courtroom. Cruz smiled triumphantly before solemnly bowing his head towards Lynn. No more questions for this witness. As Danny left the witness box, Lynn called as her next witness, Grant Keel. After walking Grant through the previous testimony, Lynn asked him for his thoughts about the video of Kane's assault taken by the Keel's doorbell camera. "The video speaks for itself," Grant replied, to chuckles from the jury. "Do you know who assaulted Randy Kane outside your residence?" Lynn asked. "Yes, I do. It was me," Grant said. "I confronted him for hurting Danny and for having a connection with my wife." "Objection," roared Raleigh Cruz from the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor, Danny Keel has already admitted to the assault. The defendants are just trying to confuse the jury." "Mr. Cruz, you're the one who set the precedent for asking that question to witnesses. Your objection is overruled." Cruz only had one question for Grant. "Who's lying, you or your son?" Grant shrugged. "Saying neither one of us is equivalent to saying both of us, wouldn't you say, counselor?" Cruz blinked slowly in confusion at the answer. As he tried to unravel the mental knot that Grant Keel had tied him in, several members of the jury chuckled. Lynn dismissed Grant from the witness stand and called the next witness, Leland Keel. Questioning for Keel followed the same pattern as Grant's questioning. After verifying the accuracy of the recording and stating, "The recording speaks for itself," Lynn asked Leland the big question. "Do you know who attacked Randy Kane outside of your brother's residence?" Raleigh Cruz shook his head, seething with anger. He already knew the answer to Lynn Dunaway's question. "Yes, I do. It was me," Leland said. "I fought with him for attacking Danny and getting involved with my brother's wife." Raleigh glanced at the jurors, most of whom were trying to hide their smirks and stifled laughter. He looked at his client and shook his head. Excusing Leland, Lynn called Betty Lou Keel to the stand. Bobby Louisiana's testimony ended with "Yes, I do. It was me. I fought with him for attacking Danny and getting involved with my brother-in-law's wife." Bobby Lee Gearson's testimony ended in a similar way. "Yes, I do. It was me. I fought with him for attacking Danny and getting involved with my sister's brother-in-law's wife." Roland Cruz's anger was evident in his closing statement to the jury as he pointed at the defendants. "I don't need to prove my case. They've already done that for me." One or more of the defendants brutally fought with Randy Kane. After the attack, one or more of the defendants conspired to cover it up. They were part of a criminal conspiracy. You, the jury, know the truth. Please fulfill your duty and find in favor of Randy Kane. Lynn's closing remark was short. The only thing the plaintiffs have proved is that Randy Kane is a terrible person who has affairs with married women and hurts their children. If there was evidence of guilt, they would have been arrested. Please find in favor of the defendants. Thank you. With that, Judge Bowman banged the gavel, dismissing the jury for deliberation. The Ferguson Five, as they called themselves after Randy Kane's lawsuit, were having pizza in Grant's apartment while the jury deliberated. They felt that they had done their best under the circumstances. They hadn't lied under oath or to the police, although they hadn't shared all the facts either. Even their admissions to fighting with Kane were technically true. They were guilty, although it was guilt after the fact. "How long do you think the jury will take?" Bobby Lee Gearson asked. "I don't think it'll take them long to decide on the guilty or innocent aspect." We admitted guilt. Deciding how much to compensate the jerk will take most of their time. It could be today or tomorrow. Grant took a bite of his pizza and stared sadly at the floor. He regretted letting the others talk him out of settling with Kane. If he had, this whole ordeal would be over by now. "How's your mother holding up?" Betty Louisiana asked Danny. Danny shrugged before leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "She's really struggling. She comes home from school, goes straight to her bedroom, and cries all night. We've talked a few times about her affair and the divorce, and it's hard for her to accept it. When I asked her what she thought would happen when Dad found out, she started crying so much that I had to give her some space. She thought Dad would be angry, but eventually fix things because that's what he always did. She's now realizing that things can't be fixed and that she's responsible for her situation. She made a mistake and now she's paying for it. She made a bad choice and now she's facing the consequences," Leland said plainly as Betty Louisiana rolled her eyes. "Thanks, Captain Obvious," Betty Louisiana sarcastically replied. "I almost feel sorry for her. I've been her friend since you two started dating. I was right here, just 20 minutes away from your house. If she was tempted or had feelings for another man, she could have reached out to me and I would have dropped everything to support her. Any of us would have. Instead, she isolated herself from the people who cared about her the most so she could be with that useless person." As they all nodded in agreement, discussing the foolishness of people, Lynn's phone chimed. "Judge Bowman's clerk," she said. "The verdict is in." The Ferguson Five and their lawyer stood up as Judge Bowman entered the courtroom. After taking their seats, the judge confirmed with the jury foreman that they had reached a verdict, and it was unanimous. The foreman handed the verdict to the bailiff, who then gave it to Judge Bowman. As the five of them, along with Lynn, stood to hear the verdict, Grant closed his eyes, regretting once more not making a settlement offer to Randy Kane. In the case of Randy Kane versus Grant Keel, Daniel Keel, Leland Keel, Betty Lou Keel, and Bobby Lee Gearson, we find that there was a conspiracy to fight with Randy Kane for having an affair with Catherine Keel and for Randy Kane's mistreatment of Daniel Keel. Judge Bowman paused, and Grant felt a bit deflated. He had anticipated the verdict, but hearing it read aloud in court was humbling. We also find that the plaintiff, Randy Kane, should receive a total of $1,000 for actual damages and a total of $100 for punitive damages from the defendants Grant Keel, Daniel Keel, Leland Keel, Betty Lou Keel, and Bobby Lee Gearson. Judge Bowman peered at the jury over his glasses as they looked at him with smug smirks. Then he turned to the plaintiff's table and looked at Randy Kane. Kane's face turned purple with rage as he got up and began hurling insults at the jury and judge. "You're letting them get away with this? You idiots. Is this your idea of justice? Kane shrieked as Raleigh Cruz tried in vain to calm him down. "Is there any reason for me to poll the jury?" Bowman asked. The jury foreman grinned and shook his head. Bowman sighed and turned to the defendants. "You have 90 days to appeal the verdict, but I have a feeling you'll accept it and move on." The 6 people huddled around the defendants' table were laughing and smiling as they hugged each other, while Judge Bowman dismissed the jury and banged his gavel to close the trial. Unnoticed, Kat stood and looked proudly at her former family for a moment before leaving the courtroom alone, her tears leaving tracks on her cheeks. There would be no appeal of the verdict. The group accepted it as a win, and Grant happily wrote a check for $1,010. The check was made out to the court, who would then pay the funds to Raleigh Cruz so they wouldn't have to interact with the former coach. After Cruz wrote a check for $707, the amount of the jury award minus his fee, he left the area swiftly. Cruz was disappointed but had to accept the unfortunate outcome. That's how contingency cases went sometimes. Grant and Lynn resumed their full-time law practice. Their relationship had turned into a romantic one after Grant's divorce, and so Lynn spent more time in Grant's apartment than her own. As their relationship grew stronger, they talked about what to do with Lynn's apartment. They also discussed the possibility of having children. Lynn wanted at least 1, preferably 2, but Grant hesitated. At 46, he worried that he was too old to be a father. Lynn made it clear to him that he was being foolish. So at the age of 47, Grant Keel became a father once again. Danny was able to visit shortly after the birth of his half-brother. He was thriving at West Point and enjoying his engineering courses. However, like his father, he had a strong interest in law and could see himself becoming a JAG attorney one day. Grant and Lynn weren't the only new parents in the Keel family. Leland and Betty Louisiana had decided to adopt. Betty Louisiana had known for a long time that she couldn't have children of her own, but had always been hesitant about adoption. When a 16-year-old girl, the niece of one of Betty Louisiana's co-workers, became pregnant by her high school boyfriend, Leland and Betty Louisiana discussed the situation for hours before finally deciding that adoption was something they wanted to pursue. Neither of the child's parents were substance abusers, they were just 2 young kids who found themselves in a difficult situation. Leland and Betty Louisiana welcomed their new daughter, Leanne Keel, 8 months after Grant and Lynn's son, Wyatt Keel, was born. On a crisp autumn morning in Ferguson, Bobby Lee Gearson called Grant and asked if they could meet for coffee at the nearby cafe. Grant, puzzled, agreed, and shrugging at Lynn, followed his longtime friend out the door. "Do you know why I got divorced?" Bobby Lee asked as soon as they were seated. "I know it was due to irreconcilable differences, but I never asked for more details. It wasn't my business." Bobby Lee had met and married his wife while Grant and Kat were living in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They had flown back to Ferguson for the wedding, where they met Bobby Lee's bride and found her to be a beautiful and lively woman who seemed to be deeply in love with him. After Grant's posting in North Carolina, the Keels were sent to Germany for 3 years. They received news of Bobby Lee's impending divorce 2 years into their German posting. "We broke each other's trust. I was the first to break that trust when I made a mistake at a bachelor party in Vegas, and I confessed it to her. Then, she decided to have a revenge fling on me. In that moment, we realized our marriage was so damaged that counseling couldn't fix it. Plus, she didn't even want to fix it. She had fallen in love with a coworker and just wanted out of the marriage. That happened 10 years ago, and ever since then, I've had a negative view on marriage." Grant knew this to be true. Bobby Lee, who was a genuinely kind and nice guy, also happened to be quite attractive. He had a good salary working at the fire department and had earned royalties from his patents, which gave him a nice additional income. However, Bobby Lee rarely dated. His family had been urging him to create a dating profile or try other ways to meet someone, but he adamantly refused. "All right, so where are you going with this, Bobby Lee?" "I've been spending time with Kat," he said. Bobby Lee fiddled with his coffee stirrer, looking down at the table as he dropped this bombshell on Grant. "Seriously? You're dating my ex-wife?" Grant didn't know how he should feel right now. Shocked? Definitely. Angry? Maybe. We've only gone out for coffee a few times and had lunch once. Nothing has happened so far, and nothing will happen without your approval. We both understand that. She's also been seeing a therapist every week to understand what led her to destroy her marriage. After my divorce, I saw a therapist for several years to figure out why I ruined my own life. You both cheated on your partners, so I guess you have that in common, Grant said with a hint of annoyance in his voice. Bobby Lee nodded, seemingly unfazed by Grant's tone. Cheating on my wife was the worst thing I have ever done to someone. The feeling of being cheated on by someone I loved was almost as bad, but I would prefer that over how I felt when I cheated. Grant, you know Kat better than any of us. Do you think she'll ever make that mistake again? Grant tilted his head to the side as he pondered Bobby Lee's question. I don't know, man. I never thought she would cheat in the first place, so I guess I don't know her as well as you think I do. I hope she's learned her lesson. I hope she'll never cheat again and that she'll be a trustworthy partner for the next guy, but I wasn't willing to take that risk. Bobby Lee nodded in understanding. I'm willing to take that risk with her, and she's willing to take it with me if you give us your blessing. If you don't want to give your blessing, I'll end it now before things get too complicated. Grant leaned back in his chair and let out a deep sigh as he contemplated Kat and Bobby Lee's relationship. How did he truly feel about his ex-wife becoming a part of his family again? He still loved her, and she still loved him. Love doesn't just disappear after over 20 years. Kat would always have a place in his life, and he in hers. But could they shift their relationship to friendship after all the pain she had caused? Could he find it in himself to forgive her? Did he want to hold on to his anger and watch her suffer? Here's the thing, Bobby Lee. I think I'm okay with it. Maybe I won't have the same kind of relationship with her that I have with your sister, but I think I can get part of the way there eventually. As long as you two treat each other well and bring happiness into each other's lives, I'll support you. I want the mother of my son to have a good life and be mentally in a good place. You're a good friend and a good person, so maybe this will be good for both of you. Good luck, my friend. If you decide to get married, make sure to invite me to the wedding. And he did. Just to clarify, courtroom dramas can be quite lengthy, so I tried to keep this story moving quickly. However, realism does suffer as a result. In this story, Kat wasn't completely burned by the situation, as her husband and son are good guys who wouldn't do that. However, Coach Kane? He's a terrible person.